Okay, so we're diving deep today into I Am Pilgrim by Terry Hayes.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, this book, right from the start, that image of the killer um, thinking about Eleanor and then like immediately cutting to her murder. It's intense.
Yeah, it's so unsettling. The way Hayes puts you right there in the killer's head, it's almost too close for comfort. But then he shifts to this very clinical, detached description of the crime scene. And it's like, okay, this is going to be more than just your average thriller.
It is. It's like this huge, intricate story, with characters carrying all this baggage from their past.
Yeah.
And everything that happens, it just keeps building and building, and you read the whole thing. So we're going to try to unpack it all like a super intense book club discussion. Let's dig into the story, the characters, those big turning points, without making it feel overwhelming, hopefully.
Exactly. It's like trying to understand the machinery of the story. What makes these people tick? How do their actions set off these chain reactions? And what are those moments that completely change the course of everything? We're going to try to find those aha moments where it all clicks.
Yeah, so where do we even start with a book this big? Maybe with the narrator. I mean, he's got so many names, right? Pilgrim, Scott Murdoch, Jude Garrett.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to keep track.
That's deliberate, I think, our listener. That right away, Hayes is hinting at one of the big themes: identity. This guy's constantly changing who he is. It's like he's lost any sense of a real self after spending so long in the shadows. Makes you wonder if he can even connect with anyone or if it's all just an act. Like at the beginning, he's retired, living this quiet life. He's trying to disappear after his time with the Division, that super secret agency.
The Division? Yeah, just the name sound, like shadowy. They deal with stuff so top secret that even other agencies can't touch it. And our narrator was right in the middle of it all. Remember how he talks about being recruited? He was already living a secret life even before that. And that Moscow operation he mentions, it sounds like that really messed him up. Like someone broke into his carefully constructed world.
It definitely left its mark. He talks about all the normal things he had to give up, the experiences he missed out on. So he's trying to build a new life, but it's clear that the past isn't done with him yet.
And then there's Eleanor, that dead woman in Detroit with the same blue eyes as him. That's got to be important, right? It's like this sudden link to a life he knew nothing about. But it really gets to him.
Absolutely. You start to wonder, is this a real family connection? Or is it a clue planted to throw him off? Hayes is great at keeping you guessing, and this discovery, it pulls him right back into the world he was trying to escape.
And then we get these glimpses of his different identities. Scott Murdoch, that's the name connected to his, perfect past at Caulfield Academy in Harvard, a past that's been completely erased. And then there's Jude Garrett, the author of that book about investigations, which becomes super ironic because the killer uses it as a guide.
Right. It's like he created these personas and then just discarded them. It tells you everything about his life, always hiding, always adapting, always ready to vanish. And the fact that his own work helps the killer, that's just dark.
And that book is how he ends up meeting Ben Bradley and Marcy. That couple dealing with their own trauma. Bradley's the NYPD detective who was injured on 9/11. They start looking into Jude Garrett almost by accident, but it becomes a way for them to heal, to connect again. That meeting in New York is one of those chance encounters that changes everything.
Yeah, it shows how people dealing with their own struggles can get caught up in something much bigger, something global. And Bradley, with his 9/11 experience, that adds a whole other dimension to who he is, makes him even more determined to find the truth.
And then there's Pilgrim, another name, another layer to this guy. It's a code name, but it also kind of fits him, always moving, always watching.
Pilgrim. It's like he's on a journey, but he never really arrives anywhere, always passing through.
Okay, let's talk about that first crime scene in room 89. It's brutal. But it's also really organized, the way the killer used acid and that antiseptic. It's almost like surgery, super efficient. And remember how our narrator noticed the spray was connected to that intelligence operation in the Czech Republic? That's a big red flag.
Oh yeah, that screams professional. It shows the killer's not just trying to hide a body. They're trying to erase every trace of the victim, like down to the molecules. And that link to intelligence, that raises the stakes right away. The acid and the antiseptic, that's not random either. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. They knew how to destroy evidence.
And Ben Bradley is there, leading the homicide investigation, trying to make sense of this super clean but horrific scene. Then you have those misleading clues, like that fancy calendar from Rizzoli, with that 90 country code. Our narrator, he knows European code, so he immediately gets that it's Turkey, maybe something to do with ancient ruins. But Bradley and his team, they're focused on the victim's life, her connections.
It's like they're looking at the same thing but seeing totally different things. Bradley's focused on the physical evidence, the who, what, where. But our narrator, with his spy background, he's looking for patterns, for hidden meanings. And that calendar, it seems like a dead end at first, but it actually foreshadows stuff that happens later in Turkey.
Right. And then we meet the real villain of the story, the Saracen. Yeah. Zakaria al-Nazuri. His backstory is just tragic. Seeing his father executed in Saudi Arabia, being exiled to Bahrain, joining the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, it's a life filled with violence and loss. And that becomes the driving force behind everything he does.
Yeah, you can see how that would shape someone, that kind of trauma, that feeling of injustice, it's powerful fuel for revenge. And being with the Mujahideen, he wouldn't just have learned ideology there, but also how to organize, how to fight, how to be ruthless.
And his plan, it's terrifying. Weaponized smallpox. He calls it the soft kill of America. It's his twisted idea of payback, and he's so methodical about it. Getting the polio genome, creating a version of smallpox that the vaccine can't stop, doing those horrific human trials in Afghanistan. I mean, think about it. He's using one virus to create a version of another that we have no defense against.
It's scary because it's so sneaky. It's not like a bomb going off. It's a silent, invisible threat. And those human trials, they show how far he's willing to go. He doesn't care about the suffering he causes. All that matters is his revenge.
And he's incredibly good at covering his tracks, getting a fake passport, disappearing into those underground networks. Even that whole thing with Lord Abdul Muhammad Khan in Afghanistan, that warlord who plays both sides, working with different intelligence agencies, it just adds to this whole atmosphere of, like, moral ambiguity.
Right. It shows how messy the world of espionage really is. There's no clear good and bad. It's all about self-interest. And Lord Khan, he's the perfect example of that. He's a survivor, playing everyone to get what he wants.
So how do those two stories connect? The murder in Detroit and this bioweapon plot. It happens slowly. All these different agencies, the FBI, the NSA, the division, they all start to realize that something much bigger is going on, and it's global.
That's part of what makes the book so good. It starts with something small, almost contained. But then it expands outward until it's this huge, world-threatening crisis, and all these different groups have to come together to try to stop it.
And then there's Leyla Kumali, that Turkish police detective. She comes in investigating Dodge's death. And right away, there's something mysterious about her. Like, she's raising her brother's son as her own. It's clear she's hiding something.
Yeah, that's suspicious right from the start. Why all the secrecy about her nephew. It makes you think she's involved in something bigger than just this one case. Like she's got her own agenda.
Remember that phone call she makes from that phone booth? It's like a hint that she's connected to all this in a way we don't understand yet. And you never really know whose side she's on. She keeps you guessing right up until that final confrontation with the narrator.
That's what makes her such a great character. Is she an ally? An enemy? Something in between? You're never quite sure. It keeps you on edge the whole time.
So let's talk about some of the big moments in the book and what they mean, like that whole thing with the calendar. At first, it seems like it points to something important, but it's actually a red herring. It shows how easy it is to get sidetracked in an investigation, to misinterpret the evidence.
It's a good reminder that you can't jump to conclusions. You got to be thorough, consider every angle. Even the things that seem obvious can be misleading.
And this is Saracen's plan itself. Creating this virus, planning to release it and cause all this chaos. That's the ticking clock of the whole story, right?
Yeah.
The stakes couldn't be higher?
Definitely. That's the core of the conflict, this global pandemic waiting to happen. And the Saracen is so meticulous, so organized. He's a really scary villain.
And the chase, trying to track him down across all these different countries. It's a race against time, and it shows you just how hard it is to catch someone who's really good at disappearing.
Yeah, it's a classic cat and mouse game, but on this huge international scale. It shows how much work goes into intelligence, counterterrorism, all that stuff. And it's not always glamorous, like in the movies.
And remember Marilyn, the woman who faked her death at the World Trade Center. Turns out she's the one who killed Eleanor. It's like this whole separate story that gets woven into the main plot. And it's not just random, like Bradley's connection to 9/11. It all ties into these themes of identity, survival, the way trauma can affect you.
Hayes is so good at weaving those different threads together. Marilyn's story, it seems like a side plot at first, but it actually reinforces those bigger ideas about reinvention, escape, the things people do to survive. And with Bradley, that 9/11 connection, it adds so much depth to his character, makes his motivations even stronger.
And that scene at the underwater ruins in Bodrum, That's where everything comes together. The narrator, the Saracen, Kamali. It's super tense. And we finally learn what the Saracen's real plan is.
Bodrum is like the climax of all these different storylines. It's where
Mhm.
everything collides, and you see how desperate everyone is. They're all pushed to their limits.
And that plan, it's so chilling. Distributing the virus through counterfeit medication, I mean, that's messed up, right? It's
Yeah.
because people trust medicine. They rely on it to help them. And he wants to turn that trust into a weapon.
It's terrifying because it's so insidious. It plays on our basic faith in the systems that are supposed to protect us. It turns something good, something meant to heal, into something deadly.
And then it's all up to the narrator. Can he stop the Saracen before it's too late? The whole world is at stake. You're reading it and you're just like holding your breath, hoping he can pull it off.
Yeah, the tension is so high. It's that classic race against time. Can the good guy stop the bad guy before something terrible happens? And in this case, terrible means like millions of people dying.
But what about Layla Kumali? What happens to her? It's kind of ambiguous, isn't it? She disappears. You never really know what her true motivations were or what becomes of her.
I think that's intentional. It reflects the world she's a part of. It's full of shadows and secrets. You never know who to trust. And her ending, it leaves you with this feeling of unease, like the story isn't really over.
So looking back at the whole book, what are some of the big takeaways? I think identity is huge. How so many characters are hiding who they really are, wearing masks. It makes you question who you can trust.
It's everywhere in the book. All those fake names, the lies, manipulations. It creates this atmosphere of paranoia. You never know what's real and what's not. And I think that reflects the world of espionage perfectly.
And revenge. It's a powerful motivator for both the narrator and the Saracen. They've both suffered these huge losses, and they're both driven by this need to make things right, even if it means hurting others.
Absolutely. It shows how trauma can warp people, how the desire for justice, for payback can consume you. And it raises all these moral questions about whether the ends justify the means, even when the stakes are incredibly high.
And then there's the whole idea of bioterrorism, how vulnerable we are to these kinds of threats. It's definitely something that feels really relevant today, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, big time. Hayes taps into this very real feel that we all have, that something invisible, something we can't control, could wipe us out. It's scary stuff. And it makes you think about how prepared we really are.
And the book shows the sacrifices people make when they work in intelligence, the toll it takes on their lives, their relationships, the fact that they have to constantly lie, to live in the shadows.
It's not a glamorous life. It's lonely, it's dangerous, and it comes at a huge personal cost. You have to be willing to give up a lot, maybe even your own sense of self.
And it's amazing how everything connects. Those little details, those chance encounters, they all end up being important pieces of the puzzle.
That's what makes it such a rewarding read. The more you pay attention, the more you see how it all fits together. Even those things that seem random or insignificant, they end up having meaning.
So to wrap this up for you, our listener, I Am Pilgrim is a complex, layered book. It's about espionage, terrorism, identity, revenge, all these big themes. And it leaves you with a lot to think about.
If you're going back to the book after this, I think it's worth paying attention to those small details, the things that might have seemed unimportant at first. They often hold the key to understanding the bigger picture.
Yeah, like that Rizzoli calendar.
Yeah.
Or the fact that Bradley survived 9/11. Those things end up being really significant. And here's something for you to think about. How fragile is our global security? Can we really protect ourselves from these kinds of threats? Or are we just one step away from disaster?
That's a huge question, and it's one that we all need to be thinking about. It's not just a fictional problem anymore. It's something we have to deal with in the real world.
And for me, that aha moment came when I realized how all those seemingly random things actually connected. It made me appreciate the book even more. And as you read it again, think about the morality of espionage. Is it ever okay to do bad things for a good cause? Or maybe research a little bit about the real threat of bioterrorism. It's scary stuff, but it's important to be informed.
Right. Don't just take the book at face value, dig deeper. Think about the bigger issues it raises and how they connect to our own lives.
And I want to leave you with this. At the end of the book, the narrator talks about the two women who shaped his life. Eleanor, the victim he never knew, and Layla Kumali, the detective who became so entangled with his story. It makes you realize that we're all connected in ways we don't even understand, and that even the smallest actions can have huge, unexpected consequences.